Coming to you live, but not really. It is all pomp and no circumstance with Ryder Richards on LetUsThinkAboutIt.com, the amateur hour you should never tune into. Welcome back. This is Ryder Richards with Let Us Think About It. Okay, so what did we learn this year? Just on this podcast, not in life, right? I don't want to get into that. We all had a whole bunch of life lessons this year. What this is this is going to be a roundup of the year's podcasts and the books that I've read. So I think I read something like 50 books this year. Well, let's say I read 20 books and about 30 books were audiobooks. And then, of course, 200 podcasts. I don't know, just a ton of podcasts. But for this review, we're mostly going to stick with the concepts that we covered in Let Us Think About It. And that should allow you to go back and reference past episodes. And of course, for those of you who have been following this year, this might act as a super condensed review of some of the topics we covered in our 26 episodes. So we went from paranoid reading to reparative reading somewhere around June. This is a concept by Eve Sedgwick, and the idea was to stay balanced, not just show all the horrible things about the world, but actually start looking for solutions. My two favorite books that explain the world that I have referenced most often in conversations are Moral Mazes and The Culture of the New Capitalism. Both of these are sociology books about how the world has changed. And of course, they both reference Max Weber, and they discuss how bureaucracy really kind of came out of the military. And in America, the Protestant work ethic became conflated with capitalism and eventually led to conspicuous consumption and wealth as a signal of virtue. That's right, money equals wisdom and salvation. So Moral Mazes by Robert Jackall. This focuses on the life of middle managers in large corporations, and of course how the politics needed to survive do not align with the professed values. So hard work does not pay off, but appearing to be a team player, right? Of course, while brutally shifting blame and burning through company assets, well, that just means you're a go-getter with gumption and grit. Of course, equally, Jackall maps out how middle managers end up hiding behind jargon because they can't appear not to know what they are talking about. You can't look weak, which is bad for the company. But also, legally, they learn to use vague coded language so as to be able to shift positions in an instant. And you can never really be caught with strong opinions, yet you always need to seem to be an alpha with super strong opinions. So this is crazy. Okay, so these end up being the guys and gals who make decisions with their gut, right? That's how you make your hiring decisions or your purchasing decisions, which means they end up continually perpetuating the same behaviors and stereotypes. But also, these are people who are very crafty at the optics of appearing fair or sympathetic. Richard Sennett follows up on this in his book, The Culture of the New Capitalism, by offering kind of broader examples of how capitalism affects the working class and management and stuff like this. But he discusses things like the brain drain on talent for dumb factory labor. And he discusses things like why a nurse may stay at her job despite the terrible hours and mistreatment by administration. The secret here is people often don't work for jobs, they try to work in a place where they feel they can make a difference. People need to know where they fit into the world and have relevance. But of course, they also have to go to factories to get jobs because they need a steady paycheck so they can go to the bank to get a mortgage. Which means there ends up being a competition by these companies to take the best from the labor pool and put them to work doing mind-numbing labor. So you're wasting talent because these companies, they don't actually want innovation. They want subservient, blind loyalty. But of course, that is only until they fire you, because they don't need to have loyalty to you, you just need to have it to them. Because this is something else crazy that this brought up. Business owners, of course, distance themselves and they hide at the first sign of any responsibility or accountability. They end up pushing it all down. They push it off onto others and onto technology to do the work for them, to have responsibility and accountability for them. So all in all, we as people are taught to become and embody this kind of rational actor idea of economic theory. And we've talked about this a little bit, but this kind of rational actor promotes selfish transactions rather than community relationships. Yeah, that's right. It rewards sociopathy, right? And so here's something else that's really unfortunate, because even if you aren't a sociopath, say you're a very well-intentioned millennial, right? And I might even consider myself in this group, even though I'm older than that. But many of us have been taught not to give voice to discontent or engage in confrontation. We've been taught that your mental health is more important than the frustration you might get into in a job. You do you. You simply exit. So this is what this is called, is exit over voice. We choose to exit rather than fight. And that allows these companies to keep getting away with whatever they do. So here's the thing about old people, right? Old people with experience, they tend to argue, which makes them a complete pain in the butt, especially when a company demands blind loyalty. Yeah, right, this is funny, but institutional memory and wisdom, those things we thought were great? No, apparently they suck, right? So companies just hire those people who will just move on without a fight. So really what happens here is those people don't contribute because we're taught to be part-time mercenaries, just jumping company to company. Of course, we may do things like fight and scream about politics or justice, but when it comes to our jobs, very smartly, very wise, I think we are afraid to lose our jobs. Because in our country, your survival is not guaranteed. Now, what both of these books point out is that our society is cutting itself off at its own knees and feeding on them. It's kind of like auto-cannibalism. This kind of living on the edge turns us all into sociopaths. And really, who benefits from that? Well, long term, nobody, of course, right? But in the short term, we end up burning down the world our great-grandparents built, and we do it behind a smiling gold-plated mask of jargon. Now, faced with being useless, the specter of uselessness, we promote and market meaningless differences as highly important. Because what else are we going to do? And this leads us into philosophy and Baudrillard. Philosophy books? Ooh, yeah, so honest to God philosophy, entire books, William James and Baudrillard is really what I read. I read a lot of small snippets about philosophers or their viewpoints, but sitting down and actually working through multiple books, nah, not so much, right? So anyway, reading Pragmatism by William James was great because, of course, we can argue about things all day, but he discusses moving beyond ideological or semantic quibbles into a practical reality, but also not being a slave to it. Finding some way to ground ourselves, and of course, carving ourselves out, shaping ourselves as if we're marble. He also gives a little space for spirituality here, and he says things like, sure, like you're a fish, swim up and touch the divine, get some spiritual energy on occasion, and that can help you redirect your path, right? But to come up with increasingly obtuse theories, that's just not helpful. And he was really kind of pushing back against monism, or this is kind of the notion of one fixed universal truth. But equally, he wasn't a fan of the notion that everything could be measured and figured, because that led to a type of determinism. He spoke a lot of a middle path, a middle road, a central corridor from which doors into other areas can branch off, but you needn't stay cloistered in there. So I would think that old Baudrillard would suggest that yes, these philosophies are indeed fooling themselves. He would probably also propose that they wouldn't even know that they're fooling themselves. His work on the idea of simulacrum and simulation would say that somehow we, the entire world, has lost the plot. We have lost purpose. We're basically a man adrift without a shadow. And of course, we can only keep simulating achievement. But perhaps we have not lost the plot, right? What about this? What if the story has already been written and we're merely enacting our roles unknowingly, but the memes and ideas of the world have basically moved us into denial as we end up doing things like claiming liberty and freedom while being unaware that we have none, because, of course, we're just enacting things that we think are liberty and freedom. What if we have given away our liberty and freedom and we act now only out of libidinal desire without understanding? The most optimistic book? It might end up being Utopia for Realists. It's also kind of practical though, and what's really nice is when somebody spends the time looking at things other people poo-poo and won't even pay attention to anymore, things like poverty or universal basic income, and they say, hang on, wait a second, right? The world we live in keeps saying, pull yourself up by your own bootstraps. And they say things like taking a handout is a moral failing. It's a lack of character to be poor, right? That's the implication behind this. Rutger Bregman proves multiple times over in Utopia for Realists that the government helping and protecting its citizens instead of profiteering would actually stabilize the population at much lower costs than the current system bears, which of course would help businesses, government, education, and other institutions. So what I mean by this is something like providing UBI, eradicating poverty, and making healthcare free It does a couple of things, but one of them is it grants human dignity, and it's actually cheaper than the long-term costs of maintaining things like prisons, emergency room visits, rehab clinics, diabetes, pharmaceuticals, police, etc., right? All these are costs on the system. Now, the kicker here that he says as well is we should probably cut the welfare system too. You go, well, why would we do that? Wouldn't we need that? Well, no. It's cheaper to remove the bureaucracy. What happens to somebody when they don't have to prove over and over again they're deserving of a handout? Well, what if there's no hoops to jump through and you just gave people cash? This is what's funny is studies show that the simplest solution works. Eradicating poverty, not with systems, but with money, is much more beneficial. Okay, how about the darkest episode we did? Oh, yeah, that one might be The Punisher. But of course, this is mostly a book review, so we're not going to get into that. Let's say that it was, I think, Step 28, Our Malady. Now, as we just mentioned healthcare and human dignity, one of my favorite authors nearly died in 2019-2020 because of inept healthcare systems. And this is because they're motivated by money, oftentimes over human concerns. Timothy Snyder's Our Malady walks through how our inequality as a society leads to needless death, despair, and division. He also discusses a need to fluctuate between things like solitude and solidarity. As a contemporary historian who has covered Nazi Germany and Russia, his book really walks us through things like how our fragility becomes a breeding ground for corrupt officials and corporations to continue tyranny and abuse. Now, when your health is at risk, or your family's, you end up becoming a serf or a slave who can never voice dissent. And so when our journalism as well turns into untrustworthy shit shows like it has been lately, and we end up relying on social media for news because we can't trust anything, that's all just a symptom. And it's related to our health. If you can't be honest because you're going to lose your job and your insurance and your family's insurance, well then fear and survival win out versus principled moral obligation. And this is simply the logic of free market capitalism's rational actors, or economic agents. That's what they turn us into, and we end up fulfilling the shallow logic of the market. The best economic book? Yeah, well, that's only one, and that would be Sacred Economics. Charles Eisenstein does a great job of reorienting us away from the faulty logic of neoliberal capitalist myths. Eisenstein ends up mapping out 7 steps, and this is kind of a transition from capitalism. This is an interlocking system to ascend from our self-administered despair using the bones of capitalism in which we have sheltered as we've tried to grow up. But of course, yeah, anyway, it's a mess, but I'm trying to simplify it here. There's really 3 points I want to make. 1, we need to realign money with natural decay, and that would be negative interest. 2, we need to alter the way land is used, letting it become the currency backing or kind of capital as a communally shared resource. And 3, letting pre-pollution taxation redirect innovation towards enriching a sustainable commons. So the point is, yeah, we don't need more trinkets. We need a planet. We need a world that works. We need to stop being selfish, greedy pigs, just, these kind of slick, parasitic leeches that have commoditized nature for personal gain. We, in short, need to behave like grown-ups. Eisenstein brings up 2 really great parables. One of them is the 11th round to show how usury creates loss for everybody, and the tragedy of the commons to show how individual rational actors destroy communion and solidarity. A key point is that money is not actually evil. Money is just a technology, but we let it have unnatural properties while trying to apply it to the natural world. You can't do that unnatural to natural. It has to line up. So what we need is a policy that will realign money with nature, society with people, and make nature our capital that we depend on instead of extract from. The best book on race? For me, that was The Racial Contract by Charles Mills. Now, this book spoke to me in a way that White Fragility really didn't. And even the fact that Mills had to kind of couch his arguments and ideas in academic terms to get through to people like me, that's a very salient point that he brought up in the book, which really hit home. Once again, thanks to Elle for the recommendation on this book. Okay, self-help and behavior books. How about Awareness by Anthony DeMello? This might be the best book ever, but unfortunately, I didn't even do a podcast on it. I just hold it in too much reverence to talk about it too much. I just want people to read it. But I did end up doing some reading of self-helpy kind of achievement books like Atomic Habits, and then I, got into Judson Brewer's The Craving Mind. These are sort of about addiction and willpower, along with more sort of behavior science books like Noise by Daniel Kahneman, which was great, but of course, I didn't do a good job of absorbing that one, and probably because it was just too noisy in my head. Now, the most career oriented books that I read were So Good They Can't Ignore You and Range, which fall into this kind of Malcolm Gladwell type of book, but they're maybe less expansive, and they can kind of act as a field guide to creating an interesting career and life and avoid getting trapped. But of course, the standout in this strange field of somehow making yourself better by having knowledge of knowledge is definitely, for me, How to Take Smart Notes, which I highly recommend for anyone who wants to actually make use of their reading, who wants to write or publish or remember things, or maybe even podcast. My most favorite episode to make? That might be Free Guy. I know this is supposed to be about books, but, maybe give me this one as my freebie. So yeah, Free Guy was great because I really got to dig into pop culture that of course seems very shallow and probably is, but I used it as a way to discuss pretty profound ideas of desire and identity, and the idea that the artificial intelligence is a type of government or state apparatus as kind of comparison between the two. We touched on Arendt's work, action, labor distinctions, where the subject is somehow turned into a cog in society. But we also need things like difference to really promote change, not similarity. Beep, 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 beep. Bonus section, fiction. Oh, right. So I finally finished David Foster Wallace's Infinite Jest just this year, and hooray, right? It only took me like a decade. But anyway, I feel like it was very worth it. And of course, now I feel like I need to go back and have a book club or a philosophy class to decipher all the in-depth strangeness of it. My favorite book, though, was The Overstory. It's long, but I think it's really worth it. The book kind of reshapes the fleeting human desires and personalities, their kind of companionships over time, against the backdrop of these kind of ultra long-lived trees that are under threat. Really good book. Now, if you're looking for something fun, check out The Murderbot Diaries by Martha Wells. I just found these really easy to consume. And of course, if you want some really good fantasy, check out anything by N.K. Jemisin. Her stuff's excellent as well. As a type of conclusion or summary, through the podcast, these books that I just referenced, these are tools that I can use to widen my perspective and let me come to a better understanding of how we ended up here. In a weird type of mirroring, having past knowledge also sparks ideas of how we can escape or move beyond the current predicaments that we're in. Or maybe not, right? Because, of course, humans are messy and things are complicated. But at least with this knowledge, we aren't subjected to really basic binaries. Hooray, we have graduated to advanced binaries. And now we have to work on it, somehow getting past those. But doing the show over the last really 2 years or more, it's actually less than 2 years, I feel a little bit better prepared to really engage with the world and to offer alternatives rather than just nod along with things. Questioning these long-held assumptions, that's really the podcast's goal. And of course, reading is my tool to get there. Now, none of these ideas are my own, right? These are just cobbled together or stitched together from the wisdom of others. And for the first time, though, in a really long time, I feel like I'm actually working towards some version of wisdom and a richness of life. And I would really like to thank you for spending some time with me on this journey. Okay, thanks for sticking with me. That's the end of our 2021 little year in review summary, and hopefully this gave you a little bit of an idea about the shape of the podcast over the last year. I have some really good stuff coming up next year, some more solutions for how to navigate the tricky quagmire of individuality shaped by our culture, or also how to identify identity in a way that is not divisive. If you want to get notifications about when the upcoming shows arrive and some additional info about the show, you can go to letusthinkaboutit.com and you can sign up to receive emails. I hope these shows are of value to you, and if they are, perhaps you can gift the show with a one-time sort of $5 donation, or you can become a monthly subscriber, and all of this really helps me cover the costs of running the show because there's more costs than you would think. Oh, and also side projects. I am writing down daily wads of fuzzy wisdom at bellybuttonlint.blog. That's right, bellybuttonlint.blog. And of course, I also am co-hosting a morning YouTube show that is called What the Hell is Water? And this is under the Helpful for Life company. Naturally, all links will be on the website at letusthinkaboutit.com or ryderrichards.com, whichever one you want to visit. Until next time, have an excellent new year, and I'll see you in 2022.